Welcome to the Shining Light Press podcast. I'm your host, Freddie Lopez. Today, we have another very interesting guest with us today. He is the president of the Bluewater Sanitation District, and he is a known prominent conservative activist when it comes to small government, limited government, and water rights in New Mexico. So without further ado, please welcome my friend Paul Spencer. Paul, thank you so much for joining me.
Yeah, Freddie, thanks for having me here. I appreciate taking the time to hear our story.
You're welcome anytime. So I guess my first question is, who is Paul Spencer?
Well, I'm a father and a husband to my beautiful wife, Mallory Spencer, and three children, 10, 6, and 7, two girls and one boy. And I am just a concerned citizen, concerned about affordable water and technical assistance for communities throughout New Mexico. And the state of the nation and the condition that our community public water systems are in nationwide. For too long, our infrastructure, our aging, failing infrastructure has been neglected. It has been put on the side burners. And that's a whole make America great again. We need to focus on making sure that our communities have the financial funding available to them, that in a way that is affordable, and the technical assistance. The people who are supposed to be overseeing these funds and administering these funds are doing their job, and that they have the capacity to allocate that money in a way that it's supposed to be through the federal law, and agreed upon when they voted upon these things. And as of right now, that's not taking place. The money that's supposed to be going to small communities with low population and rural areas are now being made available to bigger cities for the mere reason that small communities just can't afford it. Here in New Mexico, 85% of these communities, these community public water systems, cannot afford the medium household, cannot afford the loan portion of the grant funding that just was injected $85 billion by the Joe Biden administration. And that is 85% of New Mexico community public water systems or communities fall under the medium household income level. And so they just can't afford that grant funding that was injected, $85 billion. And that is an injustice, and it is discriminatory towards these small communities when we're more in favor of these bigger communities because they receive that funding. And this funding that's supposed to be set aside for these small communities of low population is not getting to where it's intended. And, our communities are suffering for that. Our people are suffering for that. And especially in a time like this, when we're dealing with inflation, they're going to be suffering even more. And so it's this injustice and this discrimination that I cry out for help and attention, and to shed light on this and to share it with other people so that we can hold our government bodies and government agencies accountable.
I agree. And it would seem that our government tends to give preference to bigger cities with bigger communities, whether it's Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Las Cruces, and even then in my capital city of Santa Fe, we even have our own issues with water because we are seeing so many apartment blocks just sprung up in every direction in the city of Santa Fe. And a big question that many in the community have is, well, where's the water going? Do we have enough water to sustain these apartment blocks? And that is Santa Fe, that is the capital city of New Mexico. So it's not even a problem in the big city, which is, Santa Fe's not even that big, it's just the capital city. So, and would you say that's now becoming an issue when even cities like Albuquerque, Santa Fe, even though they're giving more preference, are now facing that these issues now?
Yeah, they're still facing those issues too of aging, failing infrastructure, because our big push back in the 70s. There's just haven't been a big push on keeping up with those aging, failing systems, and there just hasn't been enough funding, I guess, allocated to that. And if funding was allocated to that, it's being misallocated and it's being sent somewhere else. And that's the the grievance that I have is, if these funding was made available so that the EPA wasn't running at a 30% vacancy here in New Mexico, where they end up missing items like time and material versus lump sum. That's where I first got started on this. Is our engineers at the end of the project kind of held us hostage and said, "Hey, look, your guys are out of money. You need to go get more money. Um, After raising your rates 300%, you're gonna have to go take out another loan so you could pay us $120,000 in overruns." And we're like, "Whoa, wow, what happened? Why are we just learning about these overruns at the end of the project?" And it went back to an instance at the very beginning of the project where they said they had to make the maps twice. And we're like, "No, there's no reason for that. Can you prove that to us?" And well, we got, they were kind of upset with us because we were berating their name, talking to all the politicians and the government about what's going on and what are we going to do about this. And so we looked into it further, and we found that they charge us $60,000 to basically click, paste, and copy the well 90 degrees to the south, 200 feet. Well, after we so-called berated their name and brought this issue up with the politicians and the government and the powers that be, we found that they charge us that for no reason. So they settled for $1,250, and we still have to pay $60,000 in overruns. But we were faced with either hiring a lawyer and losing that money, or just paying them and moving on. We chose the latter. We moved on, and we paid them $60,000. And then it so happened to be that we were supposed to we were short $60,000, and that's where the New Mexico Finance Authority said, "Hey, you guys have not brought in the amount of money you're supposed to bring in. We're supposed to bring in $160,000, and we only brought $120,000, so we're $40,000 short of meeting our agreed upon budget." And they said, "You need to find another source of funding." So we exhausted all other sources of funding that was available to us, and never got that money. And so we lost $1.2 million. And so we are today still out of compliance with groundwater in the area of the sewer lagoon, where it's not lined into where the new statutes of New Mexico and the new regulations require us to be. And they know this and they're aware of this, but we still cannot afford to address this issue because we can't afford the loan portion of the grant funding. And that's where I take issue, because at the very beginning, I asked for loan forgiveness. I didn't really know at that time that we were out of compliance with the budget, and until March of 2020. But see, I was asking for this money at the state legislature in 2020 in January and February. And I was asking because I was concerned with the laws that they were passing with the Clean Water Act, not the Clean Water Act, the Energy Transition Act. They had pushed, and I said, "Hey, look, if we keep on pushing this Energy Transition Act, we're going to lose customers because people are going to move away. Because people that work at the power plant or at the oil refinery or at the coal mines live in our communities, and we already agreed upon this budget. But when we start losing customers, we're not going to have as much revenue because we're going to lose customers." And so this is a concern that we have, and because of this concern, we're asking you for a forgiveness loan. And they say, well, we don't do that. That's the answer we got. It was, we don't do that. Well, March comes along and they say, well, you didn't meet your agreed upon budget, and you also didn't report to us that you were drawing from the same reports. But looking back, you can see in those reports for the last 2 years that we paid the loans back, that we in fact did report that we had this loan. And so they were fully aware of it. And the reason why we weren't pulling in $160,000 in revenue is because when they did this budget, we had just gone through a drought And so people were buying, and plus that the water rates were lower. So people were watering the lawns and the trees with city water. But in 2019, we had a good year. We had irrigation. And so people were using irrigation that year instead of city water. Not only was the water rates higher and people, let use less city water because of the higher rates, they used irrigation water. So our revenue was way down. We pulled in 120,000 instead of 160,000. So it's for this reason, and the other reason that we didn't disclose to them that we were pulling these funds from the same source of funding, which they were aware of because for 2 years we reported that. But that's what they claimed, and they took that $1.2 million and said, we're just going to look the other way. We know you're out of compliance, but you can't afford it. And this is where I have a take issue, because that's what the Clean Water Revolving Fund is set up for. And that's what the Drinking Water Revolving Fund is set up for. And that's what the Clean Water Act is set up for. And it states there that 30% of the clean water or the Drinking Water Revolving Fund is supposed to be set aside for disadvantaged communities to pay back the principal alone. I found that out in 2021 later on, after they told me that they can't do that. But well, you say, well, the Clean Water Act says that, and it mandates the states to set aside that 30% for the drinking water and the 15% for the Clean Water Revolving Fund. But the state of New Mexico, from what I heard from New Mexico Finance Authority and from New Mexico Environmental Department, is that the state constitution doesn't allow us to use those funds in that way. So I'm very confused as to why the Clean Water Act, which is a federal funding, and the federal government sets those regulations and those mandates and allocates that funding for small communities with low population in rural areas. Why does the state of New Mexico Constitution say that we can't use that? So here's my option of what they laid out to me: is either we have to sue them, or they have to sue us in order for us to get those funds. So I think they just told me the course of action in which we need to take in order to get that Clean Water Revolving Fund or the Drinking Water Revolving Fund from the state to allocate to us as a community a forgiveness loan, so that we can come into have the ability to afford to come in compliance with the state and federal regulations there at the sewer plant in the sewer lagoon area.
Interesting. It's so interesting because it's like there definitely is a lot of bureaucracy going on. So much bureaucracy that you have to go through just to not only have a fair shot, but also have adequate funding. And as you mentioned with the Energy Transition Act, there are so many people, especially our oil refineries, like you said, our mining companies, that are just totally were devastated by the Energy Transition Act. And as you mentioned, the legislative session, in the Pinon Post, there was a story that Democrat State Rep Liz Thompson from Bernalillo, she pre-filed a legislation that would, quote, create a new public health and climate resiliency fund to assist local communities in preparing for and responding to public health emergencies related to climate change and extreme weather. Now, this sounds good on the surface, but we have seen that in 2022, last year, many communities were just devastated. Rural communities were devastated by the fire, which was caused by an out of control, what was supposed to be a controlled burn, but it quickly got out of control. And many were advised not to do that burn, but they did it anyway because of the wind. People they told them you can't do this, but they did it anyway. And then the communities like in San Miguel County, Las Vegas, New Mexico, Mona County, and those communities have been absolutely devastated, and the government hasn't done anything. For the communities, and now we want to create a, quote, public health and climate resiliency fund when they haven't stepped up to the plate to help the community. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, they're not following their own laws as they are written today. And so they're just trying to make new laws. And that's what concerns me, is the Michelle Lujan administration, along with the state engineer who was recently put in there when the other state engineer left probably because of these reasons. Because I would think he wasn't on board with regionalization. I don't know. I haven't spoken to him yet, though. I believe that this whole regionalization effort that the Michelle Lujan uh, administration is pushing infringes upon our American form of government, a republic of the people, for the people, by the people. And that is, they're facilitating funding for regionalization far before it has even hit legislation, in that they've already adjusted points, a point system that awards communities who offer to surrender their community public water systems assets and authority to, as a government, to run and operate that small community. When they surrender to a new quasi government, they get extra points that those of us who choose to do our civic duties and to be participants in our form of government, republic form of government, these people who choose to regionalize get more money. They get more money offered to them and more money available to them than those of us who choose to uphold our Constitution and uphold our local form of government for the people, of the people, by the people. And that is, they give them 5 points if they choose to regionalize and surrender their property, that is their well, their water rights, their property, that anything that the district or the community owns in the way of water, sewer, and to a new quasi government, that will control everything that that community public water system once controlled. They will now surrender that control to a new quasi government. And I think that is segregation. I think that's discriminatory. I think that's an injustice, that we offer more money to those who surrender their authority and their rights, their freedoms and their liberties to choose for themselves what their community is going to look like, by surrendering it to a new quasi government. And for them to give them more money, even looking for safe harbor, that means they'll go back and give them forgiveness loans, where I'm over here screaming at the top of my lungs to everybody I possibly can that, hey, we need help to come into compliance with federal and state regulations. And the only way that we can do that, that I can see, is if, since we can't afford that loan portion of that grant funding that was just injected $55 billion through all 50 states of New Mexico, or 50 states of America, we can't afford that. So why are you going to give these people, again, this is where discrimination comes in, who surrender their rights and liberties and freedoms and their sovereignty, why are you going to give them the money and not give us, the American people, the taxpayers, the people who work for a living and strive to do good for their communities? Why don't you make that money available to us, the people who are trying to make our communities better and striving to uphold the regulations, the state and federal regulations? We're trying to work towards that, but you're going to give it to someone who's going to surrender. This is just more of this, gimme stuff. They give it, and the people are entrapped because they see that free money, and you can see that this happened because New Mexico voted for the Constitutional Amendment 2, which is a funding source. It is the anti-donation clause. And this will give them, the way it's written, for water, sewer, electric, and broadband. And this will give them the ability to give money to these new quasi businesses or quasi governments, because that's what the statute says is right now, that it gives to new businesses. But what about us old businesses? We are an old entity. We could use that money as well. Why not make that money available to us? So that's where discrimination comes in. And this is the injustice that I'm speaking of, that we need this money so we can stay in compliance and, keep our environment clean. And they should be rewarding those of us who are striving to do good by our community and our environment and trying to keep it safe, clean, and providing that affordable water. And that's what the EPA has mandated to us. And we need to hold them accountable and say, hey, we want to do this. We want to have a safe, clean environment, but we need your help to make it affordable because that's what the state revolving funds are for. The Clean Water Revolving Fund and the Drinking Water Revolving Fund are to help small communities with low population in rural areas live up to those mandates, those regulations, the federal and state regulations that are set out for us to afford to keep up with them. And we can't afford the loan portion of that. And it's given to the bigger cities now. So we're kind of going backwards about this. And it's not that I'm against regionalization because there's a spectrum. On the left side of the regionalization spectrum is where we work with one another and we share operators or we share accountants or we share secretaries. And that means that we collaborate with other systems. We've been doing that for decades. We've had an accountant who worked with 13 different communities, and she was awesome, and she did a great job. But this is where the point is to be made: is those sort of accountants are a niche. They have to work with all these different agencies. She sold her business to another accountant firm, and they lost all but 3 of these systems because they couldn't keep up with and make the demands and keep up with everything that we as community public water systems are supposed to do to report to the state of New Mexico. And so that's why I'm saying it's a niche, and we need more help, more technical assistance so that our accountants and our staff know what to do. So like I told you, 85% of New Mexico fall under the medium household income level, and they can't afford the loan portion of that grant funding that was just allocated $85 billion, right? Do you have any idea how much of New Mexico's community public water systems are volunteers?
Well,
80%.
80%.
80% of New
Wow.
Mexico community public water systems are volunteer community public water systems. So we are grossly serving the public's welfare at a disadvantage when 85% of New Mexico falls under the medium household income level and cannot afford the loan portion of that grant funding that was just injected $85 billion. And this is the injustice that I'm speaking to. This is the discrimination that I'm speaking toward. That we're not serving the general welfare. We're just serving the bigger cities.
I agree. And it certainly does sound like discrimination. And as you mentioned before, it's like when they're giving away, essentially what these small communities are, they're basically you have to give away your sovereignty if you want to get these benefits, if you want to comply with them. And it's just, that is not only what you call authoritarianism, but that's also socialism, where you just have one big government with everything is controlled instead of a separation of powers, like our Constitution says, where the states have most of the power, and there's checks and balances. There's checks and balances, and it seems like there's none of that even going on. Would you agree?
Yeah, this is tyranny at its best. It's tyrannical, but that this funding is only available to the bigger cities when it's supposed to be coming from the federal government, supposed to be set aside for small communities with low population. What gives them the ability to just go out there and make their own rules and change them as needed so that money be spent? Look, I get it. The money needs to be spent, but look, they only use a fifth of a percentage to administer those funds in the Clean Water Revolving Fund. Why don't they up that a little bit and get more staff on their side to go out there and administer these funds correctly so that it gets to the intended participants of our people, and that is small communities with low population in rural areas. That's what the Clean Water Act states. But like I said, in 2021, the Drinking Water Bureau and the New Mexico Environmental Department put together a little thing to change the rules of where that funding goes to, because for too long, that money was sitting stagnant and the legislators were getting upset that it was just sitting there. So they changed it so that that money can go. They took out. They said, well, the Clean Water Act doesn't say or define low population, and they took out rural America, so small communities. What they left in there, but how are they defining small communities now? Because they're giving it to the bigger cities. That funding that's supposed to be set aside for small communities with low population in rural areas, they're giving it to the bigger cities now. And meanwhile, all these 85% New Mexico struggle to meet the regulation of federal government, federal and state regulations of affordability, of being able to afford the loan portion of that grant funding. And I think that it's time for the state legislators and the Congress, United States Congress, to fence in these agencies. And that what I mean by fence in, they're control of the purse. And if this agency is not serving or providing those services and products that is agreed upon when that funding was made available, when that Clean Water Act was put into law, they need to fence it in and make it so they can't just be giving that money out. They need to put regulations on these people who are spending our taxpayer dollars and reallocating it to other things that are not and have not been voted on by the people. Rather, these unelected officials are just doing what they want to do with our taxpayers' money, and it's not going to where it needs to go. So this needs to be an issue. Make America great again. We need to focus on our infrastructure throughout the United States of America and making sure that it's affordable to our American citizens and whom they serve, so that we can update these systems and serve safe, clean, affordable water from the lower governments, us, Bluewater Sanitation District, the state government, and the federal governments, making that possible.
I agree. And if you look at the state constitution of New Mexico, Article 16, Section 2, it says here the unappropriated water of every stream, perennial, or perennial within the state of New Mexico is hereby declared to belong to the public and to be subject to appropriation for beneficial use and according with the laws of the state. Priority of appropriation shall be that. And this is stated in our New Mexico Constitution that the water is to the public. And wouldn't it make sense if the state could have small communities to maintain control of the water and be able to have access to clean and affordable water? But now it seems like, it's no longer these small communities. It's now just the government, even though the New Mexico Constitution says that it belongs to the public.
Yeah, and that's interesting because of what they're facilitating is regionalization, and that's a surrendering of our autonomy to a new quasi-government that, I've been watching here in Gallup, New Mexico, and McKinley County, where they're claiming to be the leaders of regionalization in the nation. And rather than helping these small communities get the training, the funding, and the staffing that it's needed, let's work on that regionalization side of collaborating with one another. Let's work on that first. Why are we skipping the left side of the spectrum? Don't we read left from right? Why don't we work on helping these communities with obtaining accountants? Since 2014, the state has mandated that all government entities have certified public accountants. Well, that's an unfunded mandate. It hasn't happened. Why don't we work on regionalizing the accountants to work with these community public water systems so they can make the reports and get the audits that they need in on time so they can be ready to receive that federal state funding in the form of grant and loan? Why don't we work on that instead of working on surrendering ownership and property of our community public water systems? Why are we going to go into the far right side of the spectrum and transfer of ownership first? Shouldn't we be working on helping these communities get the staffing that they need, or the accountants that they need, or even the operators that they need? There is a huge amount. In 2020, I found 36 community public water systems were hit for not having a certified operator. That's out of, I think, 650 community public water systems. 36 of them did not have a certified operator. And that number, I'm told, has only gotten worse. How would you like to live in a community where you don't have a certified operator? Why are we allowing this to happen? Why don't we regionalize and have operators that are paid well enough to stay in that area and subsidize that so that we can keep our communities safe and clean and affordable? Rather, we're going to just jump the gun and jump up over all of those possibilities and go straight to transfer of ownership. And this is where it gets worrisome because, like I said, the Constitutional Amendment 2 is a way for them to pay for that because it pays for new businesses, new staff, new infrastructure, new businesses, new buildings. What about the old businesses? What about the old community public water systems? What about them? Why don't we help them first? Why did we have to jump to transfer of ownership? Where now these communities are going to be enticed. Oh, we don't have to do the work. We don't have to go out there and have these meetings. You'll do it for us. Yeah, where does that work? Where have we seen that happen? And the outcome of that happen of those free money, we'll do it for you. It doesn't ever work that way. Sure, it's a lure and it's appealing because we no longer have to do the work as a community, but they offer that, and so these communities like, oh wow, you're going to take care of us, you're going to provide us. I mean, look at the school and how they did that with the education system. um I think George Bush is the one that pushed it. What was that called? uh No Child Left Behind. How did that work? And look at our fire stations around here in Cibola County. They've all really regionalized, but I just invite anyone to go out there and take a look at the fire trucks and the equipment that's out there and see how dire state that they are in. We're out there working with those kind of trucks and equipment that if we were able to get an accident, the driver would be in trouble. But you know, our trucks and our things are just not getting serviced like they should be. Um, so that's the same thing with regionalization. Once they regionalize that, they're going to be in control of the money. They're going to be in control of everything, and that's where it gets even scarier, Freddie. Have you heard of the 50-year plan?
50-year plan. I have heard of it. Can you give me a brief on what it is?
Michelle um, Stansberry, I believe, Congresswoman. What's that?
Melanie Stansberry?
Yes, uh, Congresswoman Melanie Stansberry. She said on there in 2021 in one of our conferences that she was involved with, said that there would be a regovernance of water. Well, here it is, regionalization. But they also spoke of um, 50-liter home. That's 13 gallons per day per person per household that will be allotted through this system to have without being. If you go over that, I'm sure you'll be fined or penalized. But this is what they want to do. They want a 50-liter home for everybody, for every community. And I just don't see how they can afford to upgrade everybody's home to be a 50-liter home when they can't afford to upgrade the aging failing infrastructure that we have today. And there's a whole slew of problems with that. But like I said, it's all about control of the money, control of your resources, and how much you can assume, how much water you as a person or as a family can consume each and every day, and without being penalized or access a fee because you went over that. And so that's the 50-year plan. Is they want everybody to have a 50-liter home in 50, by 50, 20. Actually, they want it by 2030, but this start in 2030. But by 2050, that's what they plan on doing, is having everybody a 50-liter home.
That is not good. That is not good at all. But we're um, just about over time here. But this is a good conversation. I think this will provide a lot of great information, and hopefully we can be back to where we can discuss it even further. But we're just about over time. But before we go, just wanted to say, how can people find you, and how can they support you?
Yeah, you can call me at 505-287-0156. You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and True Social under Uno Pablo CY60, or look for Paul Spencer in Bluewater Village. I just want your listeners out there to know that we have some things coming up in the state legislation, and that is the regionalization bill and the constitutional amendment 2, and how they spend that money, and the anti-donation clause. So please be out there, be aware for that, and look up this information that I've got for you, and that I've done at least 2.5 years of research on. I shared with you that link, Freddie, of what we're doing out here in Bluewater Village. We're going to have a special meeting this Wednesday, and garner up the support of my residents here, and the understanding that we can go forward and what our options are, and how to move forward. And I definitely want their support, as I do your listeners' support. And this is not just a little Bluewater Village that is dealing with these issues. This is 85% of New Mexico, and I'm looking for any community public water system out there that is struggling with meeting these funding requirements as well, and not getting the funding that they need to update their aging, failing infrastructure. And to know that there's a whole bunch of money out there. It's just our legislators and our governor and our representatives are just don't quite understand the needs that we have right now. And if we could, with one voice, share with them and demand that they hold these people who we hired as taxpayers to carry out this environmental project of keeping our community safe and providing safe, clean, affordable water, that they have failed to meet their mission and failed to meet their goals. So we need to hold them accountable so that we can get the funding that we need, so that we can be able to serve our community safe, clean, affordable water.
Thank you. I agree. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. Hopefully we have another episode again. And thank you all so much for tuning in and watching. If you like the video, please like and subscribe. And thank you so much for coming on, Paul.
Thanks for having us, Freddie. You have a good one.
Thank you. You too.
Take care.
You too.